Well, it is just after 1 o'clock, and I see that Anna has logged on, and we're expecting a few more people, but I'll just kick things off with a little housekeeping that we can go through, and then I'll turn it over to you, Corey. Anna, thank you for joining us. Community conversations are going to continue in the upcoming months. We have some great topics coming up in the next several months, so look for that coming out in our newsletter, more about that. But for today, we have my co-facilitator, Corey Knight and Bridget Beachy, and I will turn this over to Corey to move us forward.
All right, thank you, Tanya. Well, hello, everyone. It's good to see you all. Thank you for joining us today. Bridget, thank you as well. We always enjoy having you as one of our super contributors and just the knowledge and wisdom you bring to these conversations. So it's great to have you here as well. And so today what we're going to do is we want to focus today around supporting what we would call medically complex patients who are living with comorbidities. And, and some of these can be chronic health, mental health. We can also think of some of the contextual challenges people have too, and really how they've navigated the COVID-19 pandemic. Collectively, since we started community conversations, this was one of the first talks we had, and it was such a powerful response. And it showed that a lot of behavioral health providers, physicians, the rest of the medical team, a lot of these folks are struggling. And, the thing is having to adapt to quick patient care, changes in the medical systems. There's just been a lot of adjustments, a tremendous amount of adjustments. And so today we just kind of wanted to touch on this a little bit and really how we can best support some of these patients who have these unique health needs. And so Bridget, the great work you all are doing up in Washington, a lot of the patients you all see as well, probably have a lot of these comorbidities that we see. So what we can do is we can go ahead and dive on in. For those of you in attendance as well, if you haven't attended a community conversation, please feel free to unmute at times, speak up, enter in the chat box, just jump on in. This is really an experience for you all as well. All right, let's see if I can there we go. All right, so we always start off with just some basic prompts, but really we want the conversation to continue evolving organically. So really just to kind of start things off, how would you describe a patient with medical complexity? What type of comorbidities might you see? And what are some of the ways that you have helped meet their needs? And so I'll turn it over to you, Bridget, and I guess we can dive in wherever you want.
Yeah, and definitely if folks have questions or answers to these prompts, that would be super awesome. And Corey, I can't remember if we're encouraging more of the chat or more of folks taking themselves off mute.
So we generally try to encourage both because I know some folks can't unmute themselves. So I try to monitor the chat, but I always encourage people jump on in.
All right. Yeah, I think that when it comes to, the term medical complexity, I think it's just one of those situations where when you're working in a medical setting and you're working, say, for example, in primary care, once you start diving into folks' psychosocial contexts and diving into their medical contexts, you'll find that there's a lot of complexity, even in things that maybe look a little bit more straightforward. And then it's even more obvious when somebody carries, say, a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, carries a diagnosis of high blood pressure, hypertension, carries a diagnosis of, let's say, COPD. It becomes even more obvious. But one of the things that I always tell myself is that before I go into the room, I don't even really have a preconceived notion anymore about like what's going to be straightforward and what's going to be complex. I assume that all of human behavior, even if it's really maybe more of a mild issue, I still assume that it has a lot of complexity. And then I think that it underscores the importance of taking a contextual approach, not only just for behavioral health consultants, but for nurses as well as medical providers, and how understanding a person's love, work, and play, or their contextual factors, how it absolutely changes really everything with regards to treatment. So yeah, as far as types of comorbidities, it's everything, you know, diabetes, high blood pressure, they tend to walk together, chronic pain, obesity, smoking, difficulties, substance, your whole range of uh, psychosocial stressors come along with it. And then of course, you know, your more obvious depression, anxieties. And I think that for me, the most important way to help them get their needs met is doing that really strong, solid contextual interview of finding out their living situation, their relationship, their social connection, their spiritual or community connection, what they're doing for income or work, and what they really like to do for fun and what they have hobbies around. So that's the love, work, play. And I could put that into the chat. That's what I do to help support the patient. And that's what I do to help support the medical team. And I don't think that you can really give good treatment without knowing those main factors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't agree more. And, you know, as kind of what's coming to mind for me with this too is that, you know, really as clinicians, medical staff, that sort of thing, we all really should be on the same page. You know, everybody should be taking these really important things into account. And the reality of it is some clinics, hospitals do a really great job with it, you know, and others, I think there's probably some room for growth, you know, and so I think this is so important, really understanding how love, work, play, the history of what they've been dealing with, where it's really impacted their life is so important, you know, because we also want to increase that buy-in as well, you know, and that's a huge part of it too.
Yeah, I think it's such a different experience, and I think you know Corey was on the presentation that we were doing for National Register along with CFHA. It really makes a difference when you go into the room as again nurse, physician, BHC, APC, and you start asking questions about a person's life. I think it sets up a different relational frame and a different feel than when you come in and you just start diving into problem severity or you know, what is the problem, you know, the frequency, the severity. Again, not that those things aren't important, of course they are. But if you have that without the context of their everyday life, it can take you down, quite frankly, an unhelpful treatment path.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that really feeds into it's like, well, I know what's best for you versus you know what's best for you. You know, and medicine, mental health, psychology, I mean, historically has been very guilty of that in a lot of ways. And, you know, this is, I think, one of these times where we kind of have to atone for that and do our best to really honor the unique living experiences that a lot of patients have.
And the irony of the situation is, Corey, like a lot of times it's seen as, well, this is going to add so much more time. The irony is you're going to save time because you're not going to be beating your head against the wall of like, why isn't this patient doing X, Y, and Z? You're going to actually be able to come from that, I'll go even beyond patient-centered, that person-centered approach and have it be driven by the patient where you're facilitating that. So when they're giving you the ideas, well, I can do this and maybe this, or, and you know, when you do it well, patients will get to the point where they start asking you, well, what, you know, well, what do you think? And it's like, and then the cool thing is if you have their context, you're like, well, based on your context, you know, I'm leaning a little bit more towards that. Like, is that what you're thinking? And then you have this really cool shared decision making. And in the physician, family medicine physician curriculum, they are ushering in a ridiculous amount, in a good way, ridiculous, very positively ridiculous amount of things where you have to do shared decision making and taking into account the patient's context. They don't necessarily like label it as that, but that's what it is. And the expectations of our family medicine providers and our physicians going forward is going to have this contextual approach. So if you're practicing this as a BHC, you can absolutely help your physician colleagues and APC colleagues make that transition, because that's not how many folks were trained. So there's definitely going to be a sea change over this next 5 to 10 years that I think is going to be for the better. But I could also imagine it's going to be very scary. And it's like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to ask all these questions. I'm going to lose, like, where's this time going to come from? And it's like, no, you'll save the time on the back end, because when you when you're not beating your head against the wall trying to tell somebody what to do, and it's engineered from their lens. I mean, it's such a different experience as a clinician. It makes me be able to be excited. I think it actually could really help with burnout. This paternalistic, authoritarian, you do as I say, there might have some like quick wins that make your day go smoother at surface level. But in the long run, that's definitely not what's best for the patient. And it's actually, ironically, again, it's not what's best for the clinician.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really powerful, to know just first off that like we're seeing this kind of big paradigm shift, and it's wonderful. I mean, I like how you have that reframe of it, that it's like, I mean, this is a huge benefit, because the reality of it is for many of the folks that are on these calls, CFHA, they're either aware of the contextual approach, they embrace the contextual approach, or they've dabbled in it a little bit, and regardless of, therapeutic modality, we consider context at various levels. It's just, the thing is that where does this fit in our approach to patient encounters? Where does this approach fit into our approach of understanding their unique worldview? How this really affects their life, and where do these challenges take them? And I think that just having this increased awareness of this is so powerful. And I'm wondering too, because I mean, as you're mentioning with the shared decision-making model, is there an instance you could share with us that you've recently had, Bridget, where you engaged in some of this for a specific problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the BHC work, it's constant. It's probably every single visit. And then I have some really cool physician examples where maybe the physician seeing the patient, they get me for a warm handoff, and then all of a sudden we change what we do. And I did, and I can share a couple of those. But Corey, I just wanted to highlight what you had said about atoning for a lot of the mistakes that medical has done, and psychology, healthcare. We've all done it. The historical trauma of what we've done to gender minorities, sexual gender minorities, as well as the horrible racial, ethnic traumas that have been perpetuated by the healthcare system. And I'm not thinking that, okay, you get a contextual lens and that solves everything. I do think it's a big piece of that, is that you're going to, like you said, take into account each person's specific worldview, their where they're coming from, and again, getting away from that paternalistic, top-down, authoritarian approach. So I just want to thank you for highlighting. I really liked how you said atonement for that. But yeah, as for examples, I had one recently where there was a teenager, just to make it a little bit, so I'm not giving away any HP. Well, I wouldn't give any HPI, but just make it a little bit more nebulous. There was a teenager who was coming in for a well child check with our pediatrician. And the pediatrician had a medical student with them. So they kind of delved into a lot of information. And I'm not putting the medical student on blast, because this person is learning and everything. And of course, has not really necessarily been exposed to the contextual lens. So from everything that he was doing is exactly what he was taught. And I'm super proud of him for getting in there and having these conversations. But he basically comes out and says, well, the PHQ-9 is in the severe range, the GAD-7, that puts them into the moderate range. And so we talked about getting them hooked up with a therapist, and we're going to get them started on an SSRI. And so the pediatrician facilitating was like, yeah, and we're going to send BHC in. So she, I was the BHC for the warm handoff. So I go in, and sure enough, I find out a situation in which it was a teenager who was born in the United States, and then from age, say 2 to 5, was in Mexico, started school in Mexico, all speaking Spanish, then moved back to the United States from age 6 all the way through 8th grade, learned English when they were 7 years old. So you can, just kind of imagine this. And then, see, we didn't know any of that information. This is what we discovered. This with, again, all this super high PHQ and GAD-7, and she's not sleeping because of it, all the symptoms, right? So it turns out that they graduated 8th grade, and then their family moved back to Mexico. And that was for almost a year, in which she was surrounded by extended family and friends that was going to school in Mexico and was speaking only Spanish, like basically all Spanish. When I saw this person a few days ago, they have returned 1 month ago from Mexico. So came in, if you think about it, in a new high school experience in March. So missed from August to March of their freshman year. And after only speaking Spanish and being in a different school system for a year, and was feeling overwhelmed in her classes, and also was having major social difficulties because she wasn't really sure how to interact with whatever, with her friends. And she's, doing all these cool extracurriculars, but she doesn't really necessarily how to talk to anybody. So she's experiencing this high level of anxiety. So we do a little bit more digging. And like I said, when she was in Mexico, she had all of her cousins that were her age. And so they all went to school with her. So she had a built-in social network. She also had tons and tons of familial support. And then she goes, like I said, from August through March in a different school system. Imagine starting your freshman year beyond the middle of the school year, and not having this built-in sense of like all of your friends, and again, did a little bit more digging and had a lot of betrayals by friends in the past, and decided to stick with family only. So we do all this, and it didn't take long, probably about 22, 23 minutes. And we had a game plan, and I came out and I told the pediatrician, hey, we found out that their depression, anxiety symptoms started when she moved to Mexico. So it's like they started late when there was a huge adjustment, and then it worsened when there was a huge adjustment back. And so the pediatrician decided to do another visit, have her come back, get started on the plan that we started, and was going to hold off at least 2 to 4 weeks on trying a medication, because of just the amount of it being an adjustment disorder, or not disorder, see, I don't even like that word, an adjustment reaction. I think it's a very normal reaction to everything that she had gone through. And having that conversation, it absolutely changed what we did in that moment. Now, I know that wasn't a medical example, like with a comorbid chronic medical condition, but you could just imagine how that sets everything else in motion for what she's dealing with.
No, I mean, Bridget, that's a great example. I mean, because it hits on so many layers, and this really is like an onion. We peel back layer after layer, and if we stop after 1 or 2 layers, we come up with a game plan that really isn't entirely honoring our patients. And this is really important. And I mean, I really appreciate that example, just because what's coming to mind is a lot of the clinical work I do is with children and adolescents with severe full body burns, and they're from Central and South America. And so a lot of them are coming to the United States for the first time. Some of them have never been in a hospital. Some of them have never been on an elevator. So literally they get on an elevator and they're horrified. They're like, I've never seen anything like this. And it's such a huge culture shock, and there's a lot of huge contextual differences, not to mention missing family back in, let's say, if they're from an indigenous area in Mexico, like, they miss their family, they miss their school, they come somewhere new, they're not used to the food, so they don't want to eat the food here. This food's terrible, it's awful. Some of them practice different spiritual practices, engage in different cultural traditions. They can't do it here. And on top of that, which we'll get to in a sec, COVID-19 adds another layer to all that here. So we've uprooted somebody from a country, in essence, to help save their life. We get them here, and it's this huge shock. And we have to help explain to people sometimes that the symptoms you're seeing, what you described as depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms, post-traumatic stress symptoms, are a very normal human reaction.
It'd be weird if they didn't have it. Let's take you out Absolutely. Of where you're familiar, and you're all of these really strong, connections, this piece of,
Absolutely.
let's take away a big part of your humanity or opportunity to practice those bonds and humanity and connection. And it's like us as humans, I mean, that's what we need, I think, as much as air and water and food, and to kind of take them away. And Corey, I just want to add a medical example really, really, really quick.
Yeah,
A lot
please, please.
Yeah, a lot of our physicians, they're so good in our system now. I mean, they're amazing. Our resident physicians are soaking this up. Our faculty physicians are supporting it. And there's a lot of folks, because of this awesome shared decision making, a lot of our physicians are finding out when it comes to people are on the kind of the borderline with regards to having their type 2 diabetes controlled. And it's going into that range where they might have to move into insulin. But if they can make a few key factors, they can stay on oral medication only. And so our physicians are involving us in so many visits that involve where the patient says, look, I really don't want to go to insulin. And the physician says, all right, well, then I need for you to meet with our BHC so that you all can come up with a realistic plan to be able to execute those actions that are necessary to keep us at an oral medication only. Let's give it 1 to 3 months, and then we'll recheck it and just see if we can stay on this trajectory. We go in, we do our contextual interview, and then we're able to look at what feasibly are you able to change? Is there some type of barrier to you taking your medication at baseline, which is a huge factor? They're not even taking the oral medication for myriad reasons. Maybe it's something to do with increasing their exercise and body movement. Maybe it's something to do with what's realistic for them. And in those visits, it's so awesome because the entire thing is person-centered, because they're saying, hey, physician has given me this choice. I can get started on, in addition to oral medication, insulin, or we can try this other route. Let's come up with a specific action plan. And then I'm coming in saying, hey, I'm going to ask you some questions so I get to know you and get to know your context so that our game plan makes the most sense. And I'm saying things like our game plan. And really, I'm facilitating it, and I'm asking those tough questions, because if they're telling me that they're working 12-hour shifts and they're a single parent taking care of 4 kids, I'm going to be asking those hard questions about, when do you take your medication? Is there somebody there to remind you? What is your system? What is your process? Are you moving your body? What is realistic with regards to meal prepping? Like, let's be real. Let's not put something on this list that isn't going to happen. So that's just one more thing to feel like you failed at. And sure enough, a lot of these visits, what shakes out is bring it full circle with COVID-19. What really shakes out in so many of these contextual interviews is maybe relationship difficulties. Maybe there's something going on at work. There was a change. They had to work from home. They were out and about moving more. Like, there's all these contextual things, and then you can uncover them. But now you can actually come up with this realistic game plan that is fueled by the patient. And then we bring that full circle back to the physician, say, hey, here's what we found out. The physician's always so, grateful and like, yeah, I knew there was something going on, but of course they've had a million other things to address. But now the next time the physician sees them, they are able to positively reinforce that game plan, that behavioral game plan. So it makes the physician more behaviorally savvy. And instead of it being punted like a multidisciplinary team, like, oh, well, Bridge, you take, or Dr. Beach, you take care of this aspect, I'll take care of this aspect. Now I'm dealing with their medical comorbidity. They're dealing with, we're all working with the psychosocial stressors, occupational, all these different factors along with the medical in this integrated fashion. And it's really beautiful when that happens.
I mean, just hearing that, like, I'm blown away because I know it's taken a lot of work to get there. It sounds so streamlined. In that you have this excellent continuity of care where it's basically like tagging in and out, but it's also focused around the person, and so much, I think, just in my experience, what comes to mind a lot is problem solving and understanding what are the costs of some of these things. What have they taken you away from that's so important, and where else are people going to have somebody who explores that with them, who collaboratively does this work with them? You're not going to find that anywhere else. Yeah.
And it definitely I don't want to make anyone feel bad out in the world. Yeah, no, there was, I think we put out on the CFHA listserv, like literally a photo of me like keeled over, like rocking. And yeah, there's been lots of battles. This is 8 years later. I worked at the same clinic now for 8 years. So there's contextual factors that allow that thing to happen. And it was not right away. Just Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. I mean, I have no doubt about that. And just seeing how passionate and energized you and Dave are, about the PCBH model and the work that you all do, I imagine it's a labor of love, if I
Very
had
much
to
so.
accurately describe it. That's wonderful. Well, and I think this kind of gets a little bit into the next part of this too, because I mean, I think we've had such a rich dialogue so far. Let me see if I can there we go. You know, I think we've touched on some really good stuff so far. And, COVID-19 obviously caused a massive shift in how we were approaching some of these things. And it's nice because now in some areas, we feel like we're returning maybe to baseline, if there really is a baseline to return to, because a lot has happened, for a lot of people in this world. And so, I'm wondering, Bridget, if we can start off by talking about, what were some of the initial changes that you all made, and then what are some of the things you've continued to do to navigate the pandemic as it's continued moving forward?
Yeah, I think the most obvious one, and many clinics maybe had experienced that, is the telehealth options. And so for us, uh, again, we're a more established program, like I said, 8 years later. And of course, there was work done previous to that 8 years. But where it's kind of looking at its current form now, was we never left. So even when we did telehealth from the clinic. And I understand that there's lots of contextual factors at each organization. So I'm not being critical if y'all chose to do something different for, again, myriad reasons. But for us, that was a very important piece, was to continue to be able to work alongside of our teammates. So none of medical providers did not go home, and no BHCs went home. And so we did the televisit options from the clinic, and we actually continue to give patients. There was some different changes, but that happened at a few times when things got really bad with like ages, but for the most part, if patients wanted to come in, we would see them in person, and we did the 6 feet and the masks and the checking at the door, because we wanted that to stay open. And for a while, and now currently still, my day consists of in-person visits, as well as mostly at this point phone. We're not the Zoom and the Doxy option with the video has been very difficult because folks just don't get great service. So it ends up like being all choppy. So we've mostly abandoned that and have done phone visits or in-person visits. And now we just got some more information, effective like literally in the beginning of April, that you have to have an in-person visit once every 12 months. And in order to see somebody on televisit, they must have had an in-person visit 6 months previously. And so, but there are some exclusions. So now we're building that into our template if there really truly is an exclusion, and to try to encourage folks, hey, would you be interested in coming in? And they do have an exclusion on there that says if coming into the clinic will cause undue harm, that you can have that exclusion take place. So that's just yet another, like just happened, just another workflow issue. One of the really cool things that we did was we got Doximity as an app where we can call patients on that, like HIPAA protect, everything's all protected. And it goes right to their phone. So they don't have to accept any type of invite. So for a crazy busy PCVH service to have, 10 o'clock, I got to call exactly at 10 o'clock is really not feasible. So we tell our patients, yeah, your appointments for this phone visit is 10 o'clock, but just know it could be anywhere from 20, 25 minutes before to 20 to 25 minutes after, to give this window. So we continue to take these warm handoffs, and it doesn't make all of a sudden now I can't, I can't like miss this visit, because we want them, the BHCs, we want them to be able to take a handoff. And we say in our system, take the handoff first versus the scheduled patient. But then if it's like somebody's waiting by the phone and that expectation of like, I can't go anywhere until this thing rings, then it's going to put undue pressure on the patient and make them feel very uncomfortable. So we thought the best of both worlds was give that time range and say, we're going to do our best to be close. And then of course, if somebody has a really specific reason that you have to be on times, for example, maybe they're working and they have this really tight window, we absolutely will take that into account. But for the majority of folks, we give them a range. And full circle with the medical complexity, one of the very, 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 very big things that I am doing is I am checking in because we have our integrated electronic health record. So I can see if they've seen PCPs. I can see on the face sheet what their chronic medical conditions are. I should know those anyways, especially if I'm working with them. I should know what their main medical conditions are. I know that that can be, an upskilling for novice BHCs to kind of take into account all this medical context. So again, nobody panic if you're not taking into account all the medical context, but I'll look and see, like, when was your last medical visit? Because some folks, they completely shut off everything. And so now I'm trying to help facilitate, like, hey, let's get you in with your physician. And we've had some certain circumstances where people were terrified, but we were able to do a car visit, or they were terrified, or we were able to do a televisit from the medical side for the patient. So again, I know I'm a broken record, and we can make the joke that Neftali Serrano always makes for me on the CFHA podcast, plug for CFHA podcast, that it's a drinking game for every time that Bridget says context. But really, in order to make sure that the patients get what they need from their medical comorbidities and medical complexities, if they're fearful of coming into the clinic for, again, millions of reasons, we can look at those reasons and see which ones can we solve, which ones maybe we can't, and we have to do a workaround. And so really the devil is in the details in those cases. And I think that the BHC, especially if you've kept contact with your patients throughout via, phone through this pandemic, I do think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we help facilitate, well, what are we going to do to get you in some way, shape, or form, or maybe not even get you in, to have a visit with medical. I know that was a really long answer, and I apologize. I'm going to stop talking now and shove it back to you, Corey, and others.
No, I mean, but I think that gets at the heart of this kind of prompt, because first off, it does address, what are some of the big changes that we had to make? And behavioral health providers across the board had to make a huge shift to telehealth, especially in the infancy of the pandemic, because really we were still figuring out what was going on, who was at risk, who was at greatest risk, who was at less risk, how do we just conduct the day-to-day? And I find it kind of interesting that literally rolls out this new ordinance, essentially, that, well, you have to have this one in-person visit once every 12 months, this other visit every 6 months, and just from what I've gathered, just, hearing you and Dave talk about the setting you were in and the surrounding area, I would imagine that's got to be so difficult for some people in that area.
I think it's going to be. I mean, we literally just found out about this. So I haven't even necessarily navigated that many visits where I'm like, yeah, so we're going to have to, get you here in person. But if I do think that there is enough, the way it's written is they don't want to have you use the exclusion, they say limited and rare circumstances. I can't remember the exact verbiage. But if it really is a scenario where they cannot physically come in for, again, myriad reasons, maybe transportation, maybe a fear-based, whatever it is, I'm hoping that we can use that exclusion. So time will tell of how strict they're going to be. And time will tell with regards to maybe how open patients are. I've been having some conversations along the way, and I try to leave it really strongly, again, patient and person-centered. I say, you tell me what you want to do. You tell me what would be most useful. Do you want to come in? Do you want to do phone? Based on their context, there's reasons why. Sometimes they defer to me and say, well, I mean, what do you think? And I say, well, I would like to see you in person. I think it could be beneficial. But once again, if it's going to cause too much, if you're not going to be able to come in now because of that, then let's just stick with phone, or we can play it by ear. Let's do phone until you kind of feel that you're ready to come in. And then I also told them that even if you don't even call and change your appointment, if it's a phone and you just walk in, change it when you walk in. I want to reduce as many barriers and give that choice and that flexibility way back on to the patient. And I do feel like it's incumbent upon a clinician. I know everyone's system is different and the technology and the different things, but I do think that it's an important part of being a BHC is being flexible and being able to go between in-person visits, warm handoff visit, phone visit, doxy visit. And I'm sorry if that's controversial, but I do think that it's really incumbent upon the BHC to be the one who's flexible in these circumstances.
Well, I mean, Bridget, I appreciate, the transparency with that, because the reality of it is that to do this kind of work, we need flexibility. Like this is wildly different from, let's say, like a private practice, for example, and I think people in private practices, individuals in private practices can do wonderful work, wonderful work. At the same time, navigating the medical system, let alone as a patient, is such a difficult thing. Navigating the medical system on behalf of the patient, with the patient, and considering the social capital that you might have as a behavioral health provider adds a lot more layers, and the thing is, in some cases, if we don't work with them to navigate that, we don't know who will. We really don't. And I realize, like, everybody's got a lot going on. I mean, primary care days are never a dull day. At the same time, comes with the territory. So I think we all have to figure out the best approach we can for navigating whatever barriers or challenges that arise. I think one of the things too that is continuing to pop up is that this flexibility is probably also a strength in helping to navigate all of this as well. Because if we're constantly rolling with the punches, so to speak, rolling with these constant ever-present changes, sometimes knowing it's like, yeah, this is familiar ground. This is a path I've walked before, where I've had to make a lot of adjustments, can be a nice place to just take a moment and acknowledge and really help us keep moving forward.
Yeah. Corey, what is your master's degree in?
So I have two of them. I have a master's in experimental psychology and a master's in mental health counseling.
Okay. I love your summaries are awesome. I find that my licensed marriage and family folks who have a lot of systems training, they're always so awesome at summaries. And I just think that you're really awesome at summaries. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate the kind words.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So I know we've gone over a decent amount of information so far. How's this landing with the audience? I mean, I would imagine that it could land different if you're brand new, it's in your second week in primary care or integrated setting versus if you've been in integration for a while. Thoughts, questions, anything that both me or Corey or somebody else can clarify. Like, I love these virtual presentations, but one of the difficulties is you can't necessarily read the audience in the same way. Like when you're in front of everybody and giving a presentation, you can read body language, and are people digging it? Are you talking at like, is it too far above? Is it too low? Do we need, so I'm going to need y'all's help, either through the chat or take yourself off mute, just to kind of let Corey and I know, like, are we on track here? I'm taking notes too.
Well, I will step outside my comfort zone here and put in my 2 cents worth. One, I love the conversation about context, because I use that with every individual I meet, whether it's in the medical setting, but also I have a private practice I do to help people that are needing more than the private or the brief interventions from a BH. And so I'm actually seeing them off to the side for more extended care than plus doing groups. And context to me is like huge. And so one of the things, and I kind of just noted to Bridget about this, was that one of the things I find for them that really helps engage the patient is using episodic future thinking, especially when it comes to any adherence. I use it with, it's been more known for addictions behavior, but for like some of the patients, individuals I work with for adherence to diabetes treatment, using episodic future thinking puts them into the context as opposed to making it a verbal goal and a goal of like how many days or weight or whatever that may be, but making it much more tactile. What are they going to be sensing? It's much more of a sensory type of approach. And so helping them to actually putting themselves in a future context, which also is very helpful with delayed discounting. So
Can you describe that future episodic thinking approach? Or maybe you were going to do that and I should just stop talking.
Actually, no, but thank you. So yeah, episodic future thinking is an extension of episodic memory, where one of the things we found for individuals when I was at St. Louis University, when I worked with the memory clinic, was that if somebody could remember things in a much more tactile way, or they did an event in a much more tactile way, it no longer became an event, it became an experience, and experiences were much more accessible memory-wise than if it was just an event. And so what you do is you just kind of reverse it, and you take the experience and put it in the future, as opposed to saying an event is that I'm going to lower my A1C down to 7.1, or I'm going to lose X number of pounds, or whatever that case may be. Is that you're actually taking and saying, so what will your life be like, you know, as far as, let's put an experience out there, going to the park, what's it going to be like to hear your kids laughing? Or what's it going to feel like pushing them on the swing, or smelling the, you know, new cut grass, or whatever their desired expectation is, as opposed to goal, more desired expectation. It makes it much more reasonable, but also much more desirable for them to actually go through the adherence piece of it. And so part of with that is that, so how do we address this by using our core values, which is part of ACT? And so, you know, looking from that perspective, so a lot of individuals, when they start to approach their treatment adherence, or whatever their health concerns may be, it becomes much more of like they're engaging with it. And so then they're willing to pull in family members for their medical team. They're willing to actually be able to come in more consistently to their doctor's appointments and things of that nature. And so it's been an interesting experiment, but it's also been very rewarding to see people be able to make achievements that they had been struggling with for years. So yeah, there's actually a book out on episodic future thinking, I think it is, or it's in a delay. I don't know, I've read so many dang books, I can't remember now, but anyway, it's out there. And it was basically an addiction behavior treatment plan for a long time, but I've actually adopted it towards the primary care setting as well. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I mean, it's, you know, it kind of gets to the root of my philosophy of care in increasing health literacy, improving health communications, and empowering the patient to honor the better part of who they are, which is their values. So
Corey, I'm on board too. I see your messages in the chat. I mean, I think that you all are going to be doing a community conversation on myths of PCBH and integrated care. And I think that, Randy, you're hitting a lot of them, is that this idea that, oh, you know, now that we're in primary care and we're in a medical setting, that we have to keep things kind of like, you know, brief, and we can't really get to the roots. We're going to come in and how are you going to move your body more? Okay, so how many steps are you at now? What are we going to get you down to? I'm not saying that can't be part of it. But I don't care if somebody increases their steps. I only care if they increase their steps in as much as it helps them to live the life that they want to live. Exactly how Randy is saying, like, let's actually think this through. Like, what is your life going to be like with weight management? I can't stand just like weight, like pound goals. Like, oh, that's our goal, was like, we're going to lose 5% of our body weight. Now that's not wrong and bad to know. And we should know that that's a good thing versus doing a 30%. We should know, you know, starting at 5% is really good. But really what I want to know is, if you were to move your body more and you were to address some other things that maybe are currently happening, how would your life be different? And then folks will tell you, well, I'd start going to the gym, I'd go to the beach, I would do all these things if I didn't have to deal with all this, basically, quite frankly, like weight stigma and what the discrimination of society. So then I move into, and sorry for my language, let's start this shit now. Like, if you want to go to the beach and we want to go to the gym and we want to do this and we want to do that, like, sure, yeah, let's move our body. Yeah, sure, let's lose 5% of our body weight. Cool. Let's, take our medication. Cool, all on board. But I want to know, what are we going to do? And how is this you're going to make your life better? Because imagine how that's like a terrible way to come and be in healthcare. It's like on your shoulders to make everybody lose weight. I don't know. I don't want to be signed up for that, but I get to join and advocate and go on this journey with the patient to help them to go to the beach with their family, because it's something that they've wanted to do for years, and they've put it on the back burner because of stigma and discrimination. Sign me up for that latter one.
Yeah. Wow. I'm blown away by that. I really like that approach, Randy, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And Bridget, the connection between like values, maybe some solution focused work there, also the tactile associations. I think that's a really cool idea. I'm thinking of teams too, the associations aspect as well. There's so many layers to that exercise. So I really enjoy hearing about that. And and at the end of the day, something that I know I've heard you and Dave repeat many times, the Kurt, his work as well is, at the end of the day, everybody, they want a life worth living. That's the thing. Like, as far as we know, we get one shot. The thing is, the reality of it is that we want to have the best life we can, given everything that comes with it. The good, the bad, whatever comes with it. And I love these kind of exercises that are rooted in this, because at the end of the day, as you're kind of pointing out, Bridget, it really is so important, the collaborative nature of it, but also too, we can't change somebody's life for them. We really can't.
And it's just in such a like human and subtle and healthy boundary way. Instead of it being like, I'm so overwhelmed, I as a clinician, I can't fix you. You could lead a horse of water, but you can't make it drink. Instead of all these like really kind of defensive and protective and like patient blamey, it's such a more humane way of being like, you walk me through your life, you tell me what you want, and in that it's empowering because you're not fixing anything for them along the way. And I think the questions again that we're asking with the contextual interview, and not that those are the only ones you can ask, of course, but it's kind of like, well, why are you asking about spirituality? Why are you asking about who's in the home? It's like, because I'm trying to imagine what life is like. I'm trying to imagine this person's values. I'm trying to imagine this person's strengths. I'm trying to imagine this person's difficulties or obstacles. I'm trying to enter their world and go on this journey alongside of them. And that's just such a different approach than that paternalistic, authoritarian, you do as I say, and which again, like we've been saying, led to a lot of problems. And I don't think it was good for the clinicians. I don't think that's good for the clinicians either. So I think that this actually addresses a lot of clinician burnout, this kind of approach.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, it's so hard too, at the same time, I think this is a paradigm shift for a lot of clinicians, especially individuals who are not entirely familiar with the contextual approach. At the same time, it makes so much sense intuitively, and so I think this is kind of a hard line to navigate sometimes, for really wanting to provide the best care, meet the patient where they're at, and still, help get an understanding of like, well, this is the best way I can work with you. Let's create a plan. At the same time, you know, again, there's the autonomy aspect. It's up to you to carry the torch, and yeah, I think that this also kind of connects pretty well to the last thing we've talked about as well, which is thinking about some of the areas of growth maybe we've noticed in our patients as part of the time in this pandemic, but also within ourselves too, and just to share, I think one example a that comes to my mind is a patient I was working with from Mexico, uh, who did a contextual interview with, really got an understanding and worked collaboratively to help develop some treatment goals. And this individual was isolating for various reasons, past burn injury, COVID-19, also life history of, if we had to give it a term, some social anxiety, and there was a severe cost to all this. And this individual was really wanting to work to change that, and this was, I think, one of these times where with the pandemic, once we started doing some work together, really just saw some tremendous growth and some strength and some courage in this individual to take some chances and take some risks. And this individual just kind of pointed out to me, it's like, I'm really feeling a lot more comfortable than I used to in these kind of interactions, even though it's in the middle of a pandemic. There's not a lot of opportunities to practice social interactions. The hospital that I'm at kind of tries to limit some of this stuff. But the thing is, the opportunities we're able to create made a world of difference. And, I think this is one of these times where we just saw just a pretty radical shift in how this individual was living their life. And I honestly think this was good exposure in a lot of ways too, because we were able to work up in some ways to helping them prepare for going back home. So I don't know, that's one idea that came to mind, just in some other examples of like post-traumatic growth that come up to my mind as well. But I'm wondering, Bridget, what's coming to your mind right now?
Yeah, I like the reframe of the opportunities for growth. I know that many folks, the pandemic, again, not that we wanted it, and it's not trying to put lipstick on a pig, but if we had to go through the pandemic and there was no other way, is there something we can take? And a lot of folks said it really helped them with their prioritization of what really mattered. I know that for most of the folks that I've been working with, I feel like it has been, it's hard to find those like post-traumatic growth situations, because certain things just really blew up and extra difficult for, again, many reasons. But I do like to look at it from that lens. And I know that from like a healthcare, we've had more camaraderie. We've had this idea that we were able to move quicker than what we had ever thought. I think that it brought to the forefront of I'm not an expert on this at all, but some of the intersectionality between race and ethnic discrimination difficulties and issues that are present with the pandemic. It seems like people were more galvanized to put DEI initiatives at the forefront, so to speak. So I know that myself as a clinician, yeah, I think self-compassion is a big part of it. And one of the things I tell our trainees constantly, I said, so say they're being hard on themselves, that maybe a visit went long, or maybe they weren't as efficient, or maybe it wasn't as helpful as they thought, or maybe they're thinking, oh, I don't know if I even did anything. Like kind of like we were saying the last community conversations with Megan. I'm not sure if I even did anything. Like, how do I know that I even made a difference? I ask our trainees, I say, well, do you feel that the patient left in a better place than, like when they left, they were in a better place than when they came in? And they're like, well, yeah. Do you feel like your patient knew that you listened to them and you cared about them? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, then we'll get back on that horse tomorrow to get, I did a huge, I tried to do an ACT metaphor yesterday in my clinic with a shadower. It just flopped so bad. I just messed it all up. And then I like tripled down on it, and then like made it so much worse for the patient. And then it extended the visit to 38 minutes. It was like all the things that, like, if I shadowed an intern, I would tell them not to do. I'd be like, listen, pick one. If it doesn't land, that's okay. You should already have enough of a plan. Just kind of don't worry about it. Don't double down, triple down, like all these things that I say. And like, and I had a shadow of somebody I'm onboarding of like, I'm supposed to be the expert on like how to do this. And I just like fell right on my face. And, I had to do that on myself. I said, Bridge, did she leave in a better state than I found her? Yeah. Did she felt heard and listened and left with a big smile on her face? And did I learn a bunch about her? Absolutely. And we're going to have to live with the rest. So I think that self-compassion, I don't know how much it has to do with COVID, other than the fact that there's just like a lot more failures and like workflow messing up. There's just like a lot of more negative things that it seems like you almost have to adopt self-compassion.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know a single provider. I've yet to meet one who is 10 for 10, on every clinical encounter that they possibly have. And I think that acknowledging those moments where, you know, we're like, okay, like I'm here, I'm showing up, I made a small mistake. And I think, Bridget, what you're saying too, acknowledging the plan, the impact that you had on the person, like really taking away from the experience the things we know that make the biggest difference. You know, nobody comes to therapy and it's like, well, I have a plan, but the person like was cold and callous, and I guess I'm just going to do it. I have yet to meet anyone who, you know, has like that level of buy-in with a terrible therapeutic relationship, you know, or a very cold one. It's very rare. You know, at the same time, you know, the thing is that, and we know this from a lot of like the psychotherapy research, most of the change happens outside the session. You know, so the thing is, we don't know the impact, how
No, no.
prolific of an impact we've had. You know, and I mean, we have some patients, and I'm like, I can just think that come to my mind. I was like, yeah, I don't feel that like that went very well. Next time I see him, I'm like, whoa, like you were doing awesome. Like you've knocked out the goals. Like you're doing this, you're doing this. Like what changed? And you know, they'll look at you and say, well, you know, last time as we were talking about this, it just kind of made a lot of sense to me. You know,
I just love that.
yeah, absolutely. It gives you kind of like gives you kind of like a little bit of a tingly feeling because you're just like, man, it's like, wow, I didn't realize I had that kind of impact. That's wonderful. You know, and it gives you some good energy to keep running with. You know, at the same time, we also have those moments where things don't go as great. And that's okay too, you know, because the reality of it is, at least with primary care, continuity of care. You know, we're going to continue following up with people. A no today does not mean a no tomorrow.
And I found that patients have so much forgiveness. Like I've had times where, you know, something flopped. I'll try something and it flopped, and I'll say, you know, I, I did not say that the way I wanted to. And like, I apologize. Like, I just made this way more confusing for you. And people are like, oh my gosh, like, no, Dr. Beachy, like they're, you know, it's to be able to show a moment of vulnerability, to show that we're all human in this has been that's been an area of growth over these years of like, and as a novice, I couldn't ever imagine being like, oh, so I just flopped on that metaphor. Now, you know, you have a little bit more confidence. You've been doing this a little bit longer. And it's crazy when you show some vulnerability, the patients are there. And I've seen our patients work with brand new resident physicians that were first year in our BHCs where they're nervous, they're shaking, their voices are and they are protective of that. Like we got to give our patients more credit. They will forgive us if we come in and they feel our energy as being one of love and care, and that we really are there to help them. Though they will forgive you if you make a mistake. What they won't probably forgive is if you put them down or you come with a non-judgmental attitude, not if you flop on a metaphor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, I think that a lot of that boils down to, Bridget, at the end of the day, I mean, it's two people, three people, four people chatting. You know, at the end of the day, it's really about the power of like the social interaction, you know, and, you know, I really appreciate what you said about the vulnerability factor, you know, and to show that even myself as someone who could be in this position of power is willing to be vulnerable and own up to like, hey, maybe I dropped the ball on this. Hey, that's on me. You know, I think that's good modeling as well for patients as well. It's like, hey, I don't have to be perfect. You know, like this person accepts me for who I am, you know, and something I say a lot to, because I do a lot of parent work too, is, you know, I say, I'm just assuming you're doing the best you can, because they'll get real defensive. And a lot of times that's an area where I'll start.
I love that.
Yeah.
I know we're like running
Well,
out.
I know we're coming up on the hour. This is such a great conversation.
Any final,
Well,
I'm willing to stay on for another minute or two with any other just final thoughts or questions or summaries or statements or nuggets that you all experience in your clinic that we can learn from. I'm always trying to learn from, you know, and even being a super contributor, I'm trying to learn stuff too. So I'm willing to learn too.
all right. Well, it looks like at this point it's coming down to the few of us here.
Yeah,
So
that pop off. It looks like.
yeah, you know, everybody's. I appreciate though, for those of you that go back and look at the recording that joined us today, you were able to take time during your lunch break or a moment to share with us. And for those of you who were not able to attend, we hope that this kind of community conversation just gets you thinking, gets you moving, maybe helps re-energize you as well.
Absolutely.
Bridget, thank you. Thank you as always for joining us.
Yeah, had a ton of fun.
Thank you, Corey.
All right. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap everything up here. Again, thanks for today. Bridget, have a good time on your trip. Enjoy yourselves.
Enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate that.
Right.
Thanks, everyone.